организаций, который Путин создавал, чтобы порабощать и колонизировать свободолюбивые народы постсоветского пространства.
Emile, how are you, sir?
I'm good, thanks. Good to see you.
Thanks for coming on for a little bit to help us understand what's at this point not just a boiling situation. The situation has boiled over in the Nagorno-Karabakh. Would I be correct in saying that?
Yeah, Nagorno-Karabakh, or Artsakh to Armenians, ethnically Armenians is what they call it.
Yeah, so I have seen that there's a couple different names. You know, I'm gonna be wholly honest with you. I have absolutely zero idea of the players involved in this, the players behind the scenes, which of course we're familiar that there's always support structures. If it were at all possible to just kind of introduce yourself, introduce some of the things that you've worked on. I know you've worked on a documentary in the past. I know you are currently focused on the war in Ukraine, but you have also focused pretty heavily in the past on the conflict in Nagorno-Karabakh.
Yeah, so my background is I'm British, as you can tell by my voice. I served as a War Marine Commando for 12 years. I served in Iraq, Afghanistan on several operations. And then when I left the military, I then went into filmmaking, going to war zones and telling stories, like humanization stories, which we didn't really see when we were in the military, through documentaries. I make feature documentaries. So a feature film is generally 80, well, some people say 50 minutes plus, but my films generally are about 80, 90 minutes long. So after leaving the military in 2012, I then went to Syria and Iraq, 2014 up to 2016, making my first film. Then went to film school, and then I done a feature film in Ukraine after post 2014, because that war really started in 2014-ish. And then I done another feature film, the war between Armenia and Azerbaijan. And now I'm currently back in Ukraine. I'm in Kiev at the moment now. So I'm a filmmaker. I'm very much still a War Marine Commando at heart, but the way I tell my stories now is very much through the humanization of war rather than actually the military side of war.
Oh, so you're focused more on the impacts of war, beyond troops firing at each other. What's the impact to the families, impact to social structures, society, right?
Yeah, 100%. Is that I think anyone who serves in the military is that your war, for example, I was involved in the invasion of Iraq in 2003. I was involved in the invasion of Afghanistan after 9/11. Is that in the battle picture, you don't really see what goes on in the bigger picture. You don't see what goes on only in your small environment that you see it. And now as a filmmaker, I could take a step back and now see what goes on in the bigger picture of amongst the civilians and even the military and such. So yeah, that's really what I do, is I focus on in-depth stories on how war affects people that we wouldn't normally see in the news.
So earlier on, when we kind of introduced what our discussion was going to be about, you mentioned a different name for the Nagorno-Karabakh. Is it Artsakh? How do you say that?
Yeah, so Nagorno-Karabakh, the region, the enclaved area that's been under attack by Azerbaijan recently, is called Nagorno-Karabakh by many people around the world. But that land's ethnically Armenian throughout thousands of years of history. So they call it Artsakh, which is their name for it. And we've just seen, I was there in 2020 when the war was happening, the 44-day war, and I made a documentary called the 45-day war, the fight for a nation, because on the last day of the war, the 45th day, hostilities was 44 days, but on the 45th day, the Russians made a peace agreement between Azerbaijan, Armenia, and themselves as a trilateral agreement. So yeah, it's called Artsakh by ethnic Armenians.
So you mentioned Russians.
The dirty Russians.
I'm under the impression that there's some form of a peace structure that's supposed to be being brokered by Russia. Can you help me understand that at all?
Yeah, so referring it to as Nagorno-Karabakh is probably better for a lot of people who aren't Armenian as such. So that territory has been Armenian for thousands of years, and then obviously we've had the Russian Empire, we then had the Ottoman Empire, everyone fighting in that region as such, that when it came to narrowing down who's going to control the area, that was Armenia, where Armenians lived. Bear in mind, Azerbaijan, who are fighting over it, is a nation that's only just over 100 years old. So that region has always been Armenian. And then what happened under Stalin? Stalin then took that territory and then gave it to Azerbaijan as a new country. The Soviet Union, obviously we know about Soviet Union, and really Stalin's thinking was, in order to give an Armenian territory to Azerbaijan, a newly formed country, will cause issues and tensions in that region, that they're always going to rely on the Soviets to be there over the umbrella nations going to control what goes on. So since then, there's always been issues. In the 90s, Armenians weren't happy with the situation. Obviously, then we come to the fall of the Soviet Union. And in the 90s, Armenia took that territory back from Azerbaijan. They go, well, it's not your territory. We're taking this territory back. And they've held on to it for quite some time. There's been a very lack of redevelopment in that region, because obviously Armenia's their GDP is quite low as such. So they've held on to it with ethnic Armenians have lived in that region. And then in 2020, and near enough 3 years ago now, in September, Azerbaijan launched a new assault onto that region. So the war lasted 44 days. In the end, the Russians brokered a peace deal where 7 territories of Nagorno-Karabakh, 5 of them were given to Azerbaijan in the peace agreement, and 2 were given to Armenia. And so Armenians are really in that region been stuck in and amongst Azerbaijan. So they're being enclaved there, where Russian peacekeepers go, we're going to give you protection. But really, we've seen for the last 3 years that Azerbaijan have been creeping forward, land grabbing more, constantly violating the ceasefire agreement. And then what we've seen a couple of days ago is where they've launched another full assault onto the actual area to take back the 2 further areas, that territories that were controlled by Armenia, to now take the whole of Nagorno-Karabakh.
So this is, and I'll end up overlaying for folks that are watching this some maps, because the area of Nagorno-Karabakh it's extremely confusing, and I did try to do my diligence to do some level of historical research here, but it's a really muddy geographical situation.
Yeah, so it's been a autonomous region that isn't recognized by anyone in the world. So what it is they see Nagorno-Karabakh as part of Azerbaijan, because that's how the maps have been drawn since Stalin days. But no one's really, when in the 90s, when Armenia took the territory back, no one redrew the maps. So it's always been its own entity, separate to Armenia, even though the people living there are ethnic Armenians.
Now you mentioned, so we connected through another one of the Funker team members, and you mentioned almost like more than just a war for land, right? There are presumably, and this is kind of a question on the basis of that comment from our group chat that we had, that there are presumably kind of ethnic ties to the back end of this between Armenians. Can you kind of give me a little bit of a better understanding of that itself?
Yeah, so Nagorno-Karabakh is, like saying, since the war in the 90s was held by Armenia, even though it's historic Armenian land, is that there's 120,000 Armenians that are living in that region. Once the war in 2020 ended and Azerbaijan took 5 territories off that region, the Armenians were put into just 2 regions, in Stepanakert, which is the capital as such. What Azerbaijan then started doing was ethnic cleansing, where they started. Bear in mind, some of the audience probably wouldn't understand, is that region is the Armenians are Christians. They're the first Christian nation, and they're surrounded by Turkey to one side. They've got Azerbaijan to the other side, Iran to the other side, and to the north they've got Georgia. So it's a small Christian nation that's surrounded by several Muslim countries, obviously apart from Georgia. And once Azerbaijan started taking the territory through the trilateral agreement, they started ethnic cleansing by getting rid of churches, turning them into mosques, started desecrating graves and so long, and then removing people from their lands. And so it's been a massive issue for Armenian people, Bear in mind, Armenia population is about 2 million-ish. And then around the world, you've got 8 to 9 million diasporas, Armenians that live all over the world, predominantly in Moscow and also in Los Angeles. So it's a very pertinent issue that's going on. The president of Azerbaijan, Aliyev, has been constantly, even though the trilateral agreement of 2020 is continually going on about taking more land. And the fact is, the Russian peacekeepers were there to provide security. And what we've just seen in the last few days, where Azerbaijan launched a full assault, is the Russian peacekeepers sat there idle. They didn't do anything to stop the assault. And I think that's a consequence of what's going on here in Ukraine.
I've actually seen there's footage of a Russian peacekeeper outpost that has been effectively burned to the ground, and they had withdrawn to an airport. I'm not recalling the exact specifics on location of that. Now, I do want to circle back to something that I find is interesting, and I think it's a point of importance for folks, and that is, Armenia and the Nagorno-Karabakh and the entirety of the area relative to religion, right? So Azerbaijan, predominantly Muslim, if I'm not mistaken.
Yep.
And then you have Turkey, so you're essentially in a sea, Christians in a sea of Muslims kind of surrounded, if you will. And what was interesting to me was the quote cleansing of churches. Is that something that has started to become more prevalent as time goes on, or is that like a historical prevalence?
It's a historical issue, but after the 2020 war, where Azerbaijan were given the 5 territories of Nagorno-Karabakh, they were very quickly to destroy it. Like one of the main cities in Nagorno-Karabakh called Shushi, the Azeris call it Shusha, there's a prominent cathedral there, and I was there during the war. They bombed it twice. There was even some journalists I knew that were in there, so it got bombed. They went there to report on it. It got bombed the second time. It's a Christian cathedral. It's been there for a long time, and the Azeris now turned into a mosque. And it is that erosion of identity and culture that they keep doing. And the fact is that after the war ended in 2020, and there was a ceasefire brokered by the Russians, obviously the Russians we'll talk about it in a little more detail in a bit, but the Russians obviously did it for their own agenda. They didn't do it for the Armenians or the Azeris. They've done it for their own agenda to have influence in that region by sending troops in there and having a dominance. The fact is, Azerbaijan has been pushing the line constantly. Even though that peace deal has been in place, they haven't adhered to it. It's because their full agenda is to take the whole of Karabakh. Rather than taking just 5 territories, they wanted the whole 7 territories. And now it's taken them 3 years, really, to actually launch a full-scale assault to take the 7 territories. What is very important, and people need to understand it, that the world has been very silent on this. And the fact is, under the trilateral peace agreement of 2020, there was one road from Armenia to Stepanakert, the capital, that the Russian peacekeepers were sat on. And I've traveled that road so many times. And it actually moved around the Azeri territory. So you had to go through the Russian checkpoints. And then as you go to Shushi, the last checkpoint, the high ground that overlooks Stepanakert, the main capital city, the Azeris were sat on that road. They weren't allowed to control that road. It was all about the Russian peacekeepers controlling who comes back and forth from that road. And one of the agreements was that that road will be kept open. 9 months ago, the Azeris stepped onto the road and told the Russian peacekeepers, we now control that road. They were prevented for the last 9 months. There's been a humanitarian crisis in Nagorno-Karabakh for the Armenians, that the Azeris weren't allowing aid, they weren't allowing food. So the people of Stepanakert have been deprived of food and medical aid for the last 9 months. What's very pertinent to this story is international pressure. After 9 months, were like, you're allowing these aid convoys to go in. So what happened 2 days before this recent war started, is aid went into Stepanakert. So people of Stepanakert, after 9 months of having no aid, were like, finally, we've got medical supplies, we've now got food. And then what happened the day after is Azerbaijan, they launched their recent attack. So what they tried to do was essentially starve the people of Artsakh, Nagorno-Karabakh out for 9 months. It didn't work. And then when they realised they couldn't starve them out, they then started bombing them. And we've seen in the last 24 hours that the Azeri and Azerbaijani military is no match to the army of Nagorno-Karabakh. Is that they had to surrender, and the Azeris are now taking over the territory through bombing.
Why do you think this isn't something that's covered a little bit more in the media?
Yeah, I work in the media now that I work in films, and the way it works with the media is that the media is a business. It's an organisation that works off profit. Unless you work for the BBC, which works with taxpayers' money. I don't want to go too much into that, but they work off advertisement. So in order to sell advertisement, for example, is like, I need to know what my audience want to see. What does my audience want to see in order for me to sell them advertisement to get profit and revenue for what we do? When it comes to an area that's in the Caucasus, Armenia and Azerbaijan, a lot of people go, it's a local war, no one's really interested. So why do they sell that story to their audience? They don't really care about what's going on. The war in 2020, the height of COVID, is that the world was preoccupied by COVID. And that's very much why the Azeris took that opportunity to launch their 44-day war. It's because they knew the world was preoccupied. The news was preoccupied. No one was interested in a little skirmish as such in Nagorno-Karabakh. And we saw in 44 days that over 7,000 Armenian soldiers died, 10 to 15,000 Azeri soldiers died. But people were preoccupied with COVID. And the reason why Azerbaijan have now launched their recent attack now is because the Russian peacekeepers are supposed to be providing protection to the Armenian citizens of Nagorno-Karabakh, of the two regions. But Russia's very weak. They're weak because the war in Ukraine I see it firsthand here in Ukraine, is the Russians went from a 3-day war into a 1.5-year war where we're currently now, and they're not winning this war. So when it comes to Russia trying to find allies, when they're trying to provide peace in one region, but looking for allies on selling their gas, who can we sell out? We've got so much surplus gas, who do we sell it to? No one's buying it in the West, no one buying it in Europe. Azerbaijan, you interested in buying our gas? They're like, yeah, we'll buy your gas off you. And what we'll do is recycle that gas and we'll sell it onto Europe because we've got friendly relationships with Europe. But on the plus side, your peacekeepers need to turn a blind eye to about what we're going to do there. And we're going to take the whole territory. And that's where the geopolitics of war is a massive issue. And a lot of people and the media really aren't interested in reporting these stories because, especially in that region, they know as Armenia doesn't have the capabilities to fight, so it's going to be a very short war.
That's something interesting that you see as a relatively prevalent narrative in most circles, is that Russia is exhausting its military capability. Of course, when you look at the things that Russia says, they are very much so not. Russia is winning. You are on ground in Ukraine, monitoring and seeing the things that are happening yourself. If there was one thing that you could tell folks that distrust the information that they're reading, that want a little bit more something direct from someone on the ground, what would that be relative to quote, and in whatever definition you prefer, who is winning right now?
That is a question I get asked a lot about who is winning a war, and yourself, being at forces, is it's hard to judge what is winning, what's losing in warfare. It's like, for example, I was in Afghanistan, I'll be winning the war in Afghanistan. I don't think we won the war in Afghanistan. We held our own, but we never won the war as such. Same as Iraq, and that is a good question. The difference is, I think anyone who served in the military is our enemy, and our training was always against Russia. It's like, yeah, we might be fighting the Taliban or Al Qaeda or the Iraqi army, but our ultimate enemy is always Russia, and it has been since American forces and German and Russian Soviet forces met in Berlin. It's always been the Cold War. We've always had that kind of Cold War that then forward became a bit of under Reagan became a more friendly relationship. But the West and Russia have always been at war. If it's not directly, it hasn't really been directly. It's always been indirectly through our proxy wars, and it is very much. And Ukraine is very much in that. I wouldn't call it a proxy war as such, but very much that Russia were trying to thought they would take Ukraine very quickly. They then realized that NATO stood up for Ukraine, the EU stood up for Ukraine, and saying this is not going to happen, is that we were always led to the illusion. I think there's two issues here when it comes to Russia. Is NATO, in order for NATO to succeed, it needs to have an enemy. You don't put an alarm on your house if no one's going to come into your house and rob it. You put it there as a defense mechanism. So NATO needs to sell the fact that there's someone out there that's going to attack you, join our organization. Otherwise, these people are going to be, and that's always going to be Russia. But at the same time, we always bigged up Russia. The Russians always bigged up Russia to Putin as such. And then they came to Ukraine and have had that, given their arse handed to them in that sense, because NATO has very much supported Ukraine. So really, I think it's a paper tiger that the Russian military is as good as what we were always led to believe, always thinking they were, is that they can't sustain a long-term offensive against a country that has modern warfare and modern weapons like Ukraine now has, thanks to NATO. So yeah, very much so. I'm not dismissing the Russian army, but people turn around. We look at a map now, is they're very in a disadvantaged position than they were on the first few days of the war.
Some will argue that those first few days of the war, were a show of force or some form of a feint. I have always understood, and I very much so don't think I am alone in believing that, Russia's initial plan and invasion attempt was a rapid force capitulation attempt. Coming in from the north through Chernobyl, the fastest route to Kyiv, attempting to take Hostomel, bypassing major metropolitan areas in the northeast of Ukraine, really just trying to get to Kyiv as fast as possible so that Kyiv could not mount a defense, and force capitulation early, ultimately reinstalling a Russian-backed government. Would that be? Would you agree with
100%,
with that?
100%. I was in Los Angeles, and then I went back to UK when the war started, and I got into Ukraine 3 days after the war started, and I spent a lot of time in Ukraine previously to the war. So I was here on the 27th, and the streets were empty. There was hardly anyone here. People hiding in their homes. They literally had roadblocks of tires, sofas, pianos, just random men given uniform and standing guard, because the Russians surrounded Kiev from three directions, from the north, the east, and the west. The only free access was to the south. And they very much sat on the outskirts of Kiev for weeks. They tried to get into Kiev, but the defense was so strong because there was a resistance movement. There was the military that was mobilized, a resistance movement, and also because the lead up to the invasion, people were humming and hawing, is there going to be a war? Is there not going to be war? Are they going to invade? Are they not going to invade? But NATO saw it, and the NATO, America and the UK kept on saying to Kiev, you're going to be invaded. And they started sending anti-tank weapons, machine guns and such. So when actually they did invade, they were actually ready. It's not like 2014 when they took Crimea and Donbass very quickly and the Ukrainians were caught off guard. This time they actually had early warning from NATO, who were like, we're picking up signals that you're going to be invaded. And that was a saving grace for it, because the Russians' agenda, very, like you said there, was very much get to Kiev as quick as you can, get the tanks literally 200 meters from where I am now is the center of Kiev, get your tanks in the street. We've got a government that's in waiting to replace them, that will support you, and will do a regime change. Ukraine will come back under the Russian influence, and the war will be over very quickly. But that didn't happen, and didn't happen because the fact NATO knew that was the plan. Also, is that Ukrainian resistance was massive. They were held on the outside. I used to go up to Irpin, which is just to north of Kiev, probably five miles from where I am now. And I used to go up there daily, where the Russian tanks were sat and the fighting was going on. And literally you would see civilian cars turning up, men jumping out with weapons and going, I'm going for the day just to go fight the Russians. And that's what held the Russians off for so long, is they couldn't actually break through the defenses to get into Kiev. And that was their main agenda. And anyone who turns around and says it was a feint attack, they weren't planning to take Kiev, is talking shit, because that was their full agenda, is to try to take Kiev in a few days. And I think one of the biggest saving grace was the fact is Zelensky remained in the city. The Americans told him to leave.
I recently had another discussion that someone posited the early feint,
Mm.
theory, still to this day. And for me, it wouldn't have made sense to align the amount of combat power
Yeah,
that you did,
exactly.
if it was really going to be just a feint. I think with every operation, especially theater wide like that, you're going to have primary and secondary goals. I think one of those secondary goals was ultimately successful in the establishment of the land bridge, right? Really, with the last bastion holdout in Mariupol there. But now at this point, it's from an initiative perspective. If you look at where the war stands today, Ukraine does have the initiative at the moment. A lot of people measuring in their own time space the effectiveness from their armchairs of Ukraine's counteroffensive. You could really make an argument in any direction, because ultimately, and I'd love your opinion on my take on this. Ultimately, the only people that know whether or not the counteroffensive is meeting their goals is going to be Ukraine themselves, not me, you, even to a certain extent NATO or Russia.
Yeah, the counteroffensives have been going on since the initial what we see on a map, when we look at a map, especially through what they call, what's the company called, is Live Maps, whatever it is that you see a lot of red, and you go, well, that red is occupied by Russia. But same as, for example, when we're in Afghanistan, is that you could show that we control an area with influence, but we don't actually have influence day to day. And that's very much what the Russians are, is they control certain towns and cities, but they don't control the area between it. And that's the key issue here, is that the Ukrainians have been doing counteroffensive. They've done a counteroffensive in the Kharkiv region up in the northeast, where last year they pushed them back. In the Kherson region last year, they pushed the Russians back. And then since the summer offensive, the spring offensive, is pushing them from Zaporizhia. The hardest part now for Zaporizhia down to Crimea is that the Russians have had pretty much 9 months of digging in. And so it's hard for them to break the line. And it's a new terminology that I've only just learned since being in Ukraine, where they call it zero line now. So zero line is the front line. And then you have first line, second, third, fourth, and so on. The Russians in that region, in the south of Zaporizhia, have up to 9 lines. So it's like breaking through them, and they've had 9 months of defense, digging in. The only saving grace that Ukrainians have is that the Russians have been mobilizing men from the ethnic minorities of the Russian Federation, men who don't really want to fight. They're doing it really because they've been rounded up to go fight, mobilized to stand on frontline positions. So when they can break the front lines. But the problem you've got in this war is especially between between Ukraine and Russia, it's an artillery war. And their artillery, and there's something that we don't understand being in the military, like as in American or British military, is how effective artillery is. Because we were always used to fighting against the Taliban, Al Qaeda, the Iraqi army. Wherefore here in this region, it is very much an artillery drill, and they can bring fire on very quickly. So when the Ukrainians take a particular position, the Russians then artillery it very quick. Same as the other way around. When the Russians take a Ukrainian position, they artillery it. It's a DF position straight away. So it is very much a war of artillery and drones. And drones, we're talking about DJI drones that you could just throw up in the air, have been adapted to drop a grenade through a hole that is the size of a meter or a yard as such of an armored vehicle. Is that both sides have adapted into this war very quickly. And we saw it in Afghanistan, is whatever we done in tactics, they then countered that. And it was very much like, they've countered that, what do we do now? And we've seen this in Ukraine massively, and that's why we're at a bit of a stalemate now to a certain degree.
Yes, the lines have, especially relative to the Kharkiv and the Kherson counteroffensives, in the fall and summer of last year, to a certain extent stabilized, relative to the ground taken. And I think that's where a lot of you get a lot of the counteroffensive as quote failed, is you have these precedents that were set last year, in Kharkiv, in Kherson, wherein Ukraine was able to rapidly recover a lot of ground relatively quickly. Kherson took a little bit longer. But relative to that, you have the counteroffensive, which is an absolute grind of this intersection of, artillery, mines, trenches. So really warfare fresh out of, the two world wars, with the added, precision of modern munitions. And that's where, and then you add drones on top of that, which takes precision to a whole nother level. You can do things now with drones that you couldn't do, or that you needed a human being to be 3 kilometers, forward to do. They've essentially turned into a scout that, if you lose it, it's not manpower, right? It's $1,000 drone. One of the things I do want to kind of bring things back to the Nagorno-Karabakh and examine for a second, what, if any, potential impacts beyond localized impacts to, the populace, to, the human aspect of war, the reality of war ultimately.
Well, yeah,
What would this matter to somebody sitting at home?
yeah, like you said there, it's a great point, and we just talk about the technology advancements of war, about drones, and what we're seeing here in Ukraine and Russia. Is what we're seeing here in Ukraine and Russia was learnt in Nagorno-Karabakh. Is the fact is the Bayraktar drones, the Hyper drones by the Israel, is they were used in Nagorno-Karabakh very much, and that is why Armenia lost so many troops in such a short period of time, because the technology of drones that was then developed in that region to now be used here in Ukraine. It's very much so. But when you talk about the impact of like the civilians on the ground, is the psychological of war, is that sound of a drone, is the sound of artillery fire, the sound of the siren. Even now, like, I mean, last night I got woken up, and that's probably why I've got bags on my eyes, is because the sirens are going off. It's that psychological impact that these wars have on people. And so many people from Armenia, because obviously the genocide of 1915 of the Turks that killed 1.5 million Armenians, and then also the Soviet Union impact. There's so many Armenians moved around the world to get away from the war, and they moved to countries like Iran, Syria, Georgia, America, Moscow, London, wherever. They traveled all over the world. And so many people talk to me about, I grew up in a war zone. I was born in a war zone. It's like I was born in Syria during the war. I was born in Iran during the war. And it's that impact, that legacy of that the war doesn't stay localized. It spreads. And this is the issue we're having here now. And we're seeing it in Ukraine also, with millions of Ukrainians have been forced out of their country. They've had to go elsewhere. Millions of people in Armenia and Nagorno-Karabakh forced off their lands, that they have to go somewhere else. Is when war isn't black and white, it's not the fact is two forces fight, one person wins, the other loses. Is that it has an actual emotional connection to so many people. And like we're saying, when we talk about the drones and the sirens and everything, it is that psychological PTSD impact it has on society.
Do you see any? Earlier we were talking about proxy wars, right? Well, it was mentioned fleetingly, but it's not something that hasn't been discussed, especially relative to Ukraine. And I just to kind of cover my thoughts on that, it is absolutely a proxy war. Ultimately, what matters is whether or not you believe that is something that is in the best, as an American myself, that is in the best interest for NATO and or as an American. But by nature, that is exactly what we are doing, is proxying the capability for Ukraine to attack Russia as ultimately an underlying adversary for the West. Is there proxying of any kind between Azeris, Armenians? Is any of that going on right now?
100%. This is a massive, like this. I can go on for hours about talk about this situation. Is geopolitics is a complex issue. It's one of the things. For example, talk about America and Britain. America and Britain, our agendas are very much the same. Even though we're part of NATO, the rest of NATO isn't generally online with Britain and America. Is Russia is our enemy and has been for influence around the world for over a century near enough now. if not since, like we're saying, talking Second World War, even before Second World War, we had issues with Russia. So we're always doing what we can do to counter our threat. Who's our threat? Our threat is Russia. How do we counter that threat? Is we can't be seen to go directly against them, so we go via proxy. You think about the Cuban Missile Crisis. What was all that about? About the Soviet Union. You think about the Vietnam War. You think about Korea. You think about all these conflicts that have happened around the world. Is rather than directly fighting Russia or the Soviets, is we do it through proxy. What's going on here in Ukraine? Rather than supporting countries around the world or going to war with the Russians directly, is Ukraine's fighting the Russians. We, like the Ukrainians, how are we going to support these to fight our enemies? How do we do it? And that's what we're going to do. We're going to stand up for them and we're going to support them so we're not indirectly. I remember when I was in Afghanistan, the amount of intelligence reports we were getting about the Iranians and Russians supporting Taliban commanders in certain areas. It's a proxy, and that's what it is not rather than having that direct contact with the enemy, you're doing it through a proxy. So rather than the United States of America focusing on, okay, what's going on in this region, this country and everything else, is a country is directly involved with Russia, how are we going to support them? And we're going to support them over the table, rather than indirectly. We're going to support them with weapons, and we're going to say we're supporting you and what you're going to do about it. If you've got an issue, are you going to go war with NATO? No, you're not. So we're going to support our ally, who's Ukraine. So it is very much a proxy war. We saw it in Syria as well, of all countries that were supporting certain terrorist organizations. United States of America, Britain, France, Saudi Arabia, and Turkey supported the terrorists in Syria. I'm as a British guy who's a patriot, being British, is I will say my country supported the terrorists rather than the Assad government, because that was our agenda at the time, and I don't support that. But what happens here in Ukraine, I do support. What happens in Armenia against the Azeris, I do support. And it is very much a proxy war. What happens in Armenia and Nagorno-Karabakh is the fact is that you have Russia, that's the ultimate puppet master on what's going on. You have the Azeris fighting the Armenians. You have the Turks involved who are NATO. And you have agreements under the table between the Russians and the Turks about the future of a country like Armenia. And that's very much its geopolitics. And what a lot of people don't understand is countries have allegiance with another country, not because they like them, not because they're friends with them, but it's because it's economic. They need to deal with them. You think now, for example, like I mentioned earlier, is Azerbaijan, Armenia relies on Russia for protection. It's not because they like them, it's because America is not coming to their aid. If America is not going to come and support us, and Europe's not going to come and support us, we need someone to protect us from our bully, our neighbour who's always going to be bullying me, which is Azerbaijan and Turkey. And the Russians go, we'll provide you protection. And they provide them protection to a certain degree. It's because then Turkey and Azerbaijan, who have totally different deals with Russia, go, hold on a second, the world's blacklisted you, Russia, on gas. What we can do is we can buy your gas off you, and then we can recycle it to Europe. So in return, what we want you to do is turn a blind eye as peacekeepers to us assaulting this country. Even though they're not friends as such, they turn a blind eye. That's geopolitics. It's a game of chess that the world works in. And a lot of people get very passionate and very subjective on it and go, well, this shouldn't be happening. But that's the way the world is. And it's like, I don't agree with it, but that's the way it is. So yeah, very much the war in Nagorno-Karabakh is a geopolitical chess game.
Yeah, I don't know that there could be a war globally wherein there wasn't some form of proxying or chess of some kind. I don't think the world is large enough anymore that there aren't, that there isn't a geopolitical back end to it.
Yeah.
You can look at just about every war that we've had, and while some have faces of nobility, for example, on the back end there's a lot of geopolitical shifting that is determining which way the war goes. I have a question about Kyiv though. So one of the things that you see, and that's pops up here and there, is the mood in Kyiv. You'll see the narrative that Kyiv is partying while its men are dying. How is the mood in Kyiv?
So I came here, the first time I came here was 2016, after post-2014, after the war there. And obviously the war was going on in the east, but then the rest of the cities were normal. Is when I came back this time, on the 27th of September, is Kyiv was empty. there was literally, I was walking around with my body armor down the main drag, past restaurants and bars that were all closed, wearing my body armor, and there's police checkpoints, military checkpoints everywhere. The situation was dire that everyone thought the Russians were going to take over the city. That then, within 6-7 months after the Russians got pushed back from Kiev, the situation changed, that people started slowly coming back. Now, you can go out for great dinners. Do you know what I mean? I have better dinners in Kiev than I do in the UK, for example. However,
That's
that wasn't
good.
the
That's
case.
because your food sucks in the UK, man. That's what mushy peas. What are
You're
mushy
American.
peas?
You're
I'm sorry. I
to talk about food.
don't. Oh, please. We have
the
much
fact is-
better food. You ever had smoked brisket?
living
Get
off
out of
like
here with your mushy
for-
peas
I was
and your
rationing
fried
food.
fish.
There was nowhere to get food. I would have a bit of cheese, a bit of ham, and a few Pringles and a gherkin out of a tin. That was the reality of what was going on when the war. But then when the Russians got pushed back from the actual Kiev, people start returning. Logistics could return. So even though the war was still going on in the air raid, what time is it now? It's now 11:45. I know the air raid siren is going to go off in the next 4 hours, that there's going to be something in the air coming towards the city, that the air defense system hopefully works, that it shoots it down. But the reality of it is people going in bars, eating food, enjoying themselves, is these people have suffered for a long period of time. Is that this war has been going on since 2014. Is what do you expect if there's a war in Los Angeles? Do you expect, if the front line's in Los Angeles, do you expect the people in San Francisco to be living underground, eating out the trash cans? No, that is how far front lines are from certain areas. But it hasn't always been that far. It was being a lot closer. It's only due to the fact is that NATO supported Ukraine with weapons to push them back to these regions. So in Armenia, for example, like what's happened recently is the Armenians are a different kind of breed of people. They're not fighters, they're more artistic poets. Do you mean they're like creative people? Is what's happened recently in Nagorno-Karabakh is, I was chatting to someone earlier, is all the bars and restaurants are closed. When I was there during the Nagorno-Karabakh war, is you couldn't go out and party, you couldn't sing a song, even though they love singing and dancing, the Armenians. You couldn't do it. Ukrainians are very different in their mindset. Their mindset is, our soldiers are out fighting, we're going to go enjoy ourselves. We're going to party, we're going to eat our food, now we can get it. But at the same time is that you can go out for dinner. I was out dinner last night, and you've got a guy who's going off to the front line again. Soldiers have their R&R. They come back to the city. They want to have their chill time. They want to have a drink. They want to have some nice food. Then they go back to the war. People haven't forgotten about the war. And it's very much like, I obviously weren't there because I'm not old enough, even though, believe it or not, it's like World War II when the German bombers used to come over London and bomb the shit out of the city overnight. Is that people go live in the underground when the air raid siren would go on. They would then bomb the city, air raid siren goes, it's all clear, and people come back and live their normal lives. And that's very much what life is like in Kiev and other cities of Ukraine. Because it is a big country, is that people will then take their measures, and then after that, they'll go back out and live their normal life. You can't expect people to live. I can't expect an American in New York City to go start hiding in a bunker and living in a bunker, sitting there going, I'm not going out for dinner tonight, I'm not going out for a drink because the war's going on in Miami. It doesn't make sense. So anyone who does call that out is seriously naive and ignorant to the war. And if anyone's got that issue, I will pay for their flight to come to Ukraine, experience it firsthand. I will frog march them to the front line, and then I'll take them back 2 miles from the front line where they can go have a beer and they can understand the reality of war. Because a lot of people don't understand the reality of war, and they get very arsy, go, where's my taxpayers' money? Because I've seen people in a bar. Everyone in 2023 is entitled to have a fucking drink, even though the front line's only 2 miles from where you are. So that's just pure ignorance. When I get a bit passionate about this, actually, you can tell.
No, I love it. I'm into it. Get after it, man.
Is when people start saying that bullshit is because they don't have any comprehension on what warfare is, because they sit on their sofa and just giving their opinions of the world. Is people need to live their lives, and people are going to live their life. People, like tonight I was out having drinks with people and having dinner and everything, and everyone you meet has got a son, an uncle, a cousin, or whoever is on the front line. But that's not going to stop them enjoying life in 2023.
Yeah, you used World War II as an example, and the one that actually came to my mind was, post Normandy invasion, as the battle lines moved forward, the R&R location was further back in Normandy where the war previously was, and you can't expect, someone that's being rotated back to the people that are trying to set infrastructure back up, who are enjoying themselves for dinner. You can't expect things like that to not take place, right? To a certain extent, the war is still going on, and people are still thinking about it. I can guarantee you that the people in Ukraine are aware that the war is going on. But they also have their lives that they're trying to live, that they're trying to not be impacted by Russia's invasion. And that one, I personally was just interested, in the mood itself, because Ukraine is big. It isn't that big, especially related to the United States. It kind of dwarfs, the little UK. UK's a little tiny place, but
such power.
Such power. What's always made me laugh and is interesting to me, all of my deployments have been very joint assignments, and I've been with Aussies, I've been with Brits. The thing that never goes away, really, no matter what nation I'm with, is pitter patter military banter. You can almost kind of throw a couple jabs at them, and it's normal thing. There are people probably watching this going, "Oh my God, I can't believe he just said that." It's
standard. It is that military humor, and I think, and that is, you've hit the nail on the head there. Is that when you're living in such uncertainty, where you're living on the edge, that you could actually, where I am now, this building get hit in the next few hours by a Russian missile. Is that when you live on that kind of life, that kind of lifestyle, and that's the lifestyle that everyone in Ukraine lives, because people don't go to bed at night thinking they're going to die. They don't expect a missile to come through their roof or through their window. But that's the reality that happens every night, is that when you live in that kind of life, you have to look at life and go, well, today I'm going to enjoy myself. I'm going to live it. I'm going to live life, because you never know. And like you were saying there a minute ago about World War II and the front line, and where people have an R&R, is even during World War One, in the trenches in France and in Belgium, 4 miles behind the line, people were going on their R&R and having drinks, dancing, listening to music, and they knew in 4 days' time they're going back to the front line. And that's very much the feel here in Ukraine, is that war isn't forgotten about at all, 100%. You cannot go out and imagine that the war's been forgotten about people, but people adapt to it. And I think very much, if people don't live in that life, they live in a Western comfortable life where they don't understand the reality of war, it's easier to criticize other people for, why are you out in a bar drinking? Why are you out having nice dinners? It's like, because I fucking can. Because tonight I don't know if a missile is going to come through my roof or not.
Sure. So you're, we've established that you're in Ukraine. What are you working on right now? Like what is Emile doing?
Yeah, so I originally came here because I finished my last project, 45 Days, the Fight for a Nation, the war between Armenia and Azerbaijan, the previous, obviously, war, so it's just happened again. And like we said, we'd done a tour of America and Canada, and then I came to Ukraine, and it was very much, I thought the Russians were going to come into the city. They were surrounding the city. We thought they were going to come street to street. So I came to Ukraine back last year to do a documentary on the battle for Kiev. Obviously, that didn't materialize because the Russians aren't as good as what we think, thankfully for the Ukrainian people. So now all I'm doing in Ukraine, I'm just reporting what's going on. I'm helping other people I know that are working on feature films, supporting them in their projects and stuff. But even though Ukraine's still at war, I enjoy my time in Ukraine. It's a great country. The people are great. They're very passionate. They're very thankful to the West, especially to America and the United Kingdom, who the two countries that have supported them throughout with weapons and training. So we're very much welcome here. And even I say this, even though the war is ongoing, I would say to people, come to Ukraine. Even now, come to Ukraine. You'll have a great time. You'll meet people. You'll learn. You understand what's going on in this conflict. So yeah, really at the moment, I'm just like reporting day-to-day life and stuff.
Okay. So where can people follow your work? How, if they were interested, how would folks find you? Socials, that kind of stuff, anything?
Emile Ghessen, Emile Ghessen, Instagram, Facebook, TikTok, all the standard platforms. It's yeah. So like I was saying, what we originally started speaking about, started covering again what's going on in Nagorno-Karabakh. And a lot of people go to me when there's ever a war. I always get constant messages because they know I turn up in war zones. It's like, are you going to Armenia? Are you going to go report? And I'm like, well, no, there's only one road in and one road out of Nagorno-Karabakh. It's been blocked 9 months by the Azeris and the Russians. Is no journalists are getting in, no civilians are getting out. What's the point in going and reporting it? So yeah, it's just through social media, just reporting and stuff. But you can find me online, and I'm always
Do you think
open to
that
questions.
do you think that well, the one road in, one road out, and it being blocked, no journalists getting in, that just kind of I have to touch on that. I have to ask. Do you think that's going to really keep? We talked earlier about the media not really covering it, and do you think that's going to exacerbate that issue, not allowing journalists in to cover it to better understand the situation in Nagorno-Karabakh?
The issue with Nagorno-Karabakh is Azerbaijan is a wealthy country. It's got a lot of natural resources, and they've been paying a lot of money over the last 10 years or so to rewrite history in that area. They are dominating what's going on. Even yesterday, Stepanakert, the capital of Nagorno-Karabakh, which is still ethnic Armenian, is you type it into Google, try it in yourself later, see if it works on yours. You type Stepanakert, and it now comes up with the name that the Azeris call it. It's not called Stepanakert anymore on Google. It's called what they call it now. And it's crazy. The fact is they're rewriting history. Is imagine Hitler having the control and the money to dominate the news agenda, because Google's is a platform, all the Yahoo, everything's a platform, is how much you spend on money on advertisement to control what things are called. Even when we were doing our film, actually, sorry to go, I'm digressing, but even my film, when we doing the tour of America, we showed it all across America. In Washington, outside our theater in Washington, D.C., we had a truck turn up with a big LED board that was paid for by the Azeri embassy to boycott our film. They phoned the cinema, the theatre, for 2 weeks telling them to cancel our... This is the level they go to control the narrative on what's going on. It's very controlling. And that's what they do, because they have the money and the wealth to control the narrative and rewrite history. And this is the danger. This is what the Russians are trying to do. This is what the Azeris and Turks are doing, is they're trying to rewrite history. People like ourselves who live in the West, we are open to freedom of speech. We can look at different sources. In these countries where people have to use a VPN, I was arguing with a Turk the other day, and he's talking about, oh, we have freedom of speech. I go, do you use a VPN when you go online? He goes, yeah. I go, I don't need to use a VPN. Why not? Because I'm not going to have the police knocking at my door to say, why are you looking at this website? There is the danger of the information wars. Information war in war is as dangerous as actually the bullet war, because this is how they create agenda, is how they create a narrative. For example, in Ukraine, it was going on all about Nazis this, Nazis that. A year and a half later, the Russians rarely use the term now Nazi, because they know that narrative has died off, because short term it worked, long term it's not going to work. So yeah, the information war is very important when it comes to warfare.
The Nazi one has perpetuated beyond maybe not Russia itself, but I would say Russian support structures in the information space continue, and I think that there are a few, just full transparency, there are a few units specifically that lean back on former symbols that were once used by Nazis, and for causes that I can't truly understand what their personal ideology is surrounding that. I'm not entirely certain, but I think that there is definitely a prevalence of Nazi symbols, but exactly what, again, the ideology of the individuals are, I'm not certain at all.
Yeah,
but you do see it.
Yeah, 100%. And what I would say is, like I said, previous to this war, I spent a lot of time in Ukraine, and I spent a lot of time with Azov, for example, where people were going, oh, they're all far right, they're all Nazis and such. And when it comes to Ukrainians, it's bizarre. It comes down to branding. It's weird. Is that a lot of them use pagan signs, and the Nazis used a lot of pagan signs also. Is the fact is like the black sun. when you see people, and I call them out for it, when I say to them, I go, why have you got that? And they go, it's a pagan. You go, yeah, but it's also associated with Nazism. They go, yeah, but this was used before Nazism. Is the Finnish Air Force were using the swastika up to 2016. And when you say, like, when you talk to people from Finland and go, well, you had swastikas inside your Air Force planes, your military Air Force planes had swastikas on. He goes, we've been using that symbol before Nazis were around. And when it comes to Ukraine, I'm not sugarcoating and saying there's no Nazis in Ukraine. Of course there's fucking Nazis in Ukraine. But they're not Nazis as in what we think from World War II. There's Nazis in America. Well, there's probably more Nazis in America than there is in Ukraine. That's fucking clear. And in the UK, there's far right in every single country. What it is I met a guy, in fact, this is random actually. I met a guy who was covered in swastikas. He was covered in swastikas. And I was like, to my mates who knew him well, I go, this guy's a fucking Nazi. He's got swastikas all over him. Goes, mate, he's not a Nazi at all. He is the most left-wing guy you could possibly meet. And I was like, why do you have swastikas all tattooed over you? He goes, it's against the system. I have swastikas because it's against everything I believe in. So I covered myself in swastikas. And this is the thing with when it comes to Ukraine is when it comes to, I was out tonight with a Japanese guy, and do you mean I know fucking people out here are Muslims and Jews and everything else? Is there isn't this stigma of Nazism that you think where they exclude certain people or people of transgender or people who are gay? Is the fact is when it comes to the swastika, it's hard to explain actually. Is that they see it as a rebellion, that is a system against this. It's like a symbol against the system. It's crazy. Is there a far right movement here? 100%. There's a far right movement in every single country. I wouldn't say it's more prevalent here in Ukraine than it is anywhere else. And when a lot of the Western volunteers came here and they went to the privy sector, which is the far right sector, they weren't, and everyone was going, oh, these American and British, Australian volunteers, Canadian volunteers are far right because they're fighting with Nazis. No, they weren't. The fact is that these guys were given the freedom to fight, that a lot of international volunteers went to go join them.
Yeah, it doesn't make sense to me. It doesn't need to, right? I'm not Ukrainian. I'm not, just not how I do things, right? It doesn't make sense 100%. To me to have a swastika on you. That one is the most prevalent. I think just about the entirety of the world can understand that to be that something that we associate very directly with what we were taught to be evil. Where it starts to get really interesting to me is, there are so many different symbols. There's eagles and there's just all kinds of stuff. There's numbers, the numbers that associate with, letters of the alphabet, all kinds of, and for the life of me, it's half of these things I didn't even know were Nazi symbols until somebody found an obscure article of some kind and sent that across to me. But it is there, right? And that is in a situation as polarizing as Ukraine, I think anything like that, or as polarizing as the war in Ukraine, which in my opinion is a nonpartisan thing, but anything like that is going to be exacerbated. It's going to be amplified, and it's going to be used from an information warfare perspective. It's the same thing that we would do. My background is actually in information warfare. That's not something that you and I have covered, because if you don't do that, then you, being Russia, would be kind of leaving a weapon on the table. Yeah, right. Yeah, that's right. Weaponizing that would be high on the list, among other things.
Where the Ukrainians have massively failed, actually, is on their branding. When it comes to stupid symbols, and for example, like saying like the number 18, for example, is that many of these units think it's cool. They think it's funny and everything else. For me, being British and you being American, who fighting against our ancestors fought against the Nazis, is like, that's not cool. But they think it's a rebellion. It's very much this. Ukraine's very much an arty rebellion against government kind of attitudes that they have. Excuse me. That they think that by drawing that on a tank isn't representing what happened during World War II or association with Hitler, is because they think it's a Slavic or it's a pagan symbol. But for me and you'd be like, yeah, I get that, but that's not cool. we wouldn't be doing that kind of thing. Before they didn't get it. When it comes to Azov, for example, Azov, which a lot of people wrote about, a lot of Western media wrote about how them being far right and Nazis organizations is. Like I said, I spent a lot of time with Azov and everything else. And did I see swastikas? Yeah, I saw swastikas. And I called him out for it several times ago. Why is that a swastika? And they go, well, that guy's got a tattoo on him. He was very much far right. He was a football hooligan. He's no longer understands that ideology. He doesn't believe in that now. But what they failed to do was when it comes to their national symbols or their unit symbols, like the eagles and their flags with the cross, the iron bars, is they didn't rebrand. And the Russians use that as very quickly as propaganda to go, well, look, they're Nazis. This is what we're fighting against. Because in Russia, the Great War, in the British...
Great Patriotic War.
Yeah, the First World War we call the Great War, and we call World War II World War II. But the Russians call the fight against Nazis the Great War. And it was a very quick and easy narrative that they used because the Ukrainians were very stupid in that sense, that it wasn't a new government control to go, we need to rebrand. This is stupid. Do you know what I mean? People are going to call us far right. We're going to look like Nazis and everything else. My time, and I've spent a long time in Ukraine, is I would not say that the Ukrainian military is far right or extreme or Nazis at all. But some people watching this will go, oh, well, he's caught up in a moment. It's like, no, I've been on the ground. I've spoken to people. Yeah, I totally understand it, that they have symbols that you could relate to being Nazism. And then when you speak to them about it, they justify it. And they go, well, actually, no, it doesn't mean this to me. It means this to me. And I go, yeah, but you shouldn't be wearing it. And they go, but that is historic to us. So very much so, yeah, I can see it. And I know it. I work in the media, how the West, but from 2014 up to this war, very much saw an easy narrative to go far right, Nazis. It was easy, and the Russians picked up on it and used it for propaganda 100%. It's because Ukrainians have been stupid. They haven't been given that education to get rid of that symbol. It shouldn't be used in this day and age. It's like certain words in our English language. There's certain words that, like the M word, we don't use the M word anymore, do we? We don't use that word because we know it's derogatory and it's wrong to use it. And I think when it comes to symbols, I don't think the Ukrainians have been educated in that way to go, you shouldn't be using this anymore.
Yeah, again, I have not been in Ukraine. I am not in Ukraine. And my focus has really always been on the footage, right? And you cover war from a very human aspect. We cover it from a very soldier's aspect. This is what's happening. These two adversaries are firing at each other from across the trench line.
There's some great footage from this war.
There's a lot of it. A lot of it. So I can't speak to, like I said, the ideology that's on the ground. I can acknowledge that, it is historical record that a lot of these symbols that they're using are associated directly with Nazis. They have named, their certain air units, the Luftwaffe, for example, right? And
this is a small minority amongst a big.
Oh, sure, yeah. No, I hear you entirely. What I think, though, the point that I am trying to make is this small minority is going to be amplified, and it is going to be weaponized from an information warfare perspective. And I would like to give everybody a really hard to swallow pill. Were the United States to be invaded, if you think that we would not, as the United States, weaponize our extremist groups, you are naive.
Of course, yeah.
If you think that we would not arm them and send them to fight, which they would be one of the first to take up arms, you are naive. I think what will be interesting to me is to see from a branding perspective, like you said, what happens after the war. Whatever after the war looks like.
And that is, and exactly what it is symbols and terminology gets weaponized and it gets used for propaganda. And Ukrainians are very slow to start with to realize that. And now, of course, they realize that. The fact is that the Russians have been monopolizing on that and weaponizing that information. But yeah, 100%. The issue when it comes to the war in Karabakh and it comes to the war in Ukraine is people are nationalists. And it's, for example, I ask this question quite a lot. Like I said to you, I'm a massive royalist. I generally vote conservative, which is for you guys Republican. That doesn't make me far right. I'm not far right. I'm not like an extremist or something else. I'm a nationalist. But when it comes to me asking you, are you a nationalist? You're going to say, yeah, I'm a nationalist. Of course you are. When it comes to Ukrainians, you go, you're a nationalist. 100% they all go, yeah, I'm very nationalist. And then when the media pick up on this story, they go, ultra nationalist. And I say to like people I know in the media, I go, what's an ultra? I saw your article a few days ago. What's an ultra nationalist? They go, no, someone that's like extreme, like patriotic. I go, that's me. Am I an ultra nationalist? No, no, you're just cool. I'm like, no, but I'm an ultra nationalist. And Americans, I've met so many Americans. They are ultra nationalists, of course you are. But it's all about terminology and how you perceive that term, that buzzword that they use. Ukrainians are nationalists. They want to fight for their country. They will stand and fight. And the reason why there has been no ceasefire and there's been no peace agreement with Russia is because they're nationalists and going, I can go out on the street now and you say to any Ukrainian, do you want the war to end? They go, 100% the war to end. It's like, but are you prepared the war to end now? They go, no, because Russia still controls our territory. And you speak to an American or Brit and they go, oh, the war needs to end. They need to like make a peace deal. It's like, what part of America would you give away? What part of the United Kingdom would you give away for peace? Because I know you as an American, me as a Brit, we'll stand and fight. We'll continue fighting because we are that ultra nationalist. Because that's what we believe in. We believe in our identity. We believe in our sovereign territory, and we won't allow it. And of course, like I was mentioning, is some people on the small spectrum, the small percentage are probably bad guys, but they're a very small percentage. And if the America was going to war tomorrow, there'd be a small percentage of people that are bad. In the United Kingdom went to war tomorrow, there'd be a small percentage that are bad. And the Ukraine is a small percentage going bad. But what is wrong is when people start going, I've seen a swastika flag, or I've seen a tattoo, all Ukrainians are Nazis. That's just bullshit, and that's just ignorance.
Yeah, it's taking one exception and making it the rule.
Yeah.
Right. But that's what's going to go viral. Right. I was having a conversation with the Funker guys earlier. Exceptions are what goes viral, and become the rule.
Of course.
Right. So
because that's the world we live
you
in.
catch footage.
That's the world we live in, where, like you're saying, viral.
Yeah.
Is that world that is every war and every like what's happened in Nagorno-Karabakh, what's happened in Ukraine, what's happened in Syria, is a certain image or certain video will just go viral, and that shapes opinions, and it's crazy. It just takes one or two people, and like you said, you dealt with information. The information war, the psyops war, that's what you're looking for, the niche to go. How do we shape these people's opinion? Let's now magnify this picture or this story or this voice. It's easy.
The best propaganda is always going to have a basis in some level of truth, right?
Yeah.
You can weaponize that. You can weaponize that small truth nugget, and you get that out to all of your target audience that are going to be predisposed to believe that, right? And then they share it with their small circles of target audience that are also going to be predisposed to believe it. And it just...
Like you're saying, there's a classic picture. A lot of people, when I have arguments with people online, because I always get told don't argue with idiots, but I always get caught up in arguing with idiots on social media. There's a picture from 2013, 2014 in somewhere in Ukraine. And it's a group of guys, and anyone who's been in the military will look at this picture and they go, they're airsofters. They look like airsoft guys, these retards on the weekend that go out doing it. And they've got a Nazi flag, a Ukrainian flag, and they've got a NATO flag. And whenever anyone argues to me about Nazis in Ukraine, they will send me that picture. They always send that picture because it comes up very quickly. And I'm like, they're Nazis, looking at them. I go, but they've also got a NATO flag. Are they members of NATO? And they go, no, they're Nazis. I go, but they've got a NATO flag there. Why do you identify that flag more than that flag? Because it suits your narrative. And it's very much that's the issue, is that we live in echo chambers through our algorithms on social media, and this is the information that we get. And like we just talked about Nagorno-Karabakh, is Azeris and Turks are very much about Armenians are terrorists, they're killing our men because this is our territory and everything else. It goes, yeah, because you live on an algorithm echo chamber where you get told that, so you're always going to think that. Wherefore you need to, society is weird now. Is the fact is, if someone disagrees with your opinion, you get very upset about it, because everyone I talk to online or everyone I speak to in my little social circle agrees with me, because that's why we're friends. That's why we're friends online. That's why we're friends in real life. When someone, me and you, just imagine me and you go out for drinks, Ronnie, and then all of a sudden you go to me, I don't agree with you. To me, that's like refreshing, because I want to hear
Yeah.
why someone doesn't agree with me. I want to hear your opinion, because that's how I learn. I don't learn from speaking to people that agree with me. I don't learn from people that have the same opinion as me. We learn from people that have different opinions. And I think that's education. I think social media is very dangerous in that sense on how we are in 2023, is that we're surrounded by people that agree with us and tell us what reinforce our opinions. That when someone calls you out, you're like, I'm offended.
Yeah, but what's interesting to me is that only happens on social media,
Yeah, yeah.
right? So it's this weird kind of well, I don't want to say intersection, but it's something I've talked about before, is that the real world is not social media, right? If you go out into the real world and you have a conversation about almost any political, geopolitical current issue, the conversation is going to go much, much different than if you have that conversation over Twitter.
Of course it is.
Right.
Yeah.
Because what we have effectively done is we tell ourselves that we're being objective, we as a society, in that we are seekers of the truth. But what we do on social media is we perpetuate confirmation bias by only following the stuff and accounts that we know are going to confirm what we already believe. So then you just have solidified the silo of your echo chamber. Well, out in the real world, there isn't an algorithm to control, you having a conversation with Joe Smith at the grocery store. And you're going to find that, to be honest with you, more people are less extreme about how they view certain issues than you'd think. The world is not black and white or red and blue the way that social media will make it out to believe, but it is of benefit for social media to do that.
Of course
Right?
it
It is of benefit. It makes them
Right.
money to put you into a box, and you should not allow yourself to be put into a box. And if you are already in one, you'll really notice it when you say, I agree with everything on my timeline right now.
Of course.
That's how you'll know, is if you scroll through your timeline and you agree with every single take that you see, you're in an echo chamber.
And that's the issue. How many men who are listening to this now have had arguments with their girlfriend through messages? And you like, what the fuck did you just say? And you've had an argument, stupid argument, a pointless argument that you would never have in real life. In real life, like communicating, real communication, where you're reading non-verbal communication, body language and such, you'll be like, why are we having this argument? Wherefore on messages and on social media, you have these arguments because someone just popped up and said something to you. It's like, what the fuck did you just say to me? Why are you saying this to me? You have that kind of, that world of where the system, the social media system wants you to have these arguments. It wants you to feed into that system. To then obviously, once it comes back to advertisement, that the longer you're on that system, that platform, the more advertisement they can sell you. And it is very much, is that echo chamber is like, it's a false reality. Is they want you to have these engagements with people that mean nothing. And I get it on social media all the time, is that when you get the duty idiot guy who starts making stupid comments, and then I'm like, I'm happy with that. That's good, because that feeds my algorithm, because I know my followers would then start attacking this party. It would then get into a conversation. Before you know it, it's then getting more exposure. Do you know what I mean? It's just the way it works. But really, it's a crazy world that we live in. We as humans now, you don't even need to live the house to live a life, because you can interact with people. Many years ago, before social media, you had to, if I didn't like something you said, mate, I would have to come around your house or find you and say it to your face. Now what I can do is I can send it on Twitter, or I can send it on Facebook or Instagram instantly. And there's that very much detached. People spread their opinion and say things they shouldn't say, because it's very easy. And it is the world we live in. And social media is a good thing, but it's a bad thing. But when it comes to war, it's like what we're saying about Azerbaijan, where they've got money and they influence and they put a lot of money into Google, into search engines. They can rewrite history. And that's a danger when it comes to state-sponsored influence.
It is a danger. It's a danger when, the superpowers of the world have that kind of money and rewrite history as well. So it's not just, we're perpetually online, and it's almost unavoidable and you know, I don't know that there is a path away from that.
No,
Right?
there isn't.
We're just continuing to get further and further online.
But the thing is, you think about it, for example, just say, I don't want to get into American politics, but just say I'm a Trump supporter, you're a Trump supporter, and there's another guy, there's three of us, there's Bob as well, who supports Biden. Is that if I was to post something that's pro-Trump on social media, is chances are Bob's not going to see it because Bob doesn't support him. So it's going to be me and you's going to see it. So it's very much like if you think about Cambridge Analytica, where they controlled information spaces to shape government, shape opinions, and shape like elections, it is very dangerous because the algorithm is dangerous in the sense that we live in this world where we only get told the information that our algorithm thinks we want to hear. So we don't get that counterbalance on what's going on. And when it comes to, like I said a minute ago, when it comes to government level and stuff, and when it comes to elections, it's dangerous. You think about Brexit, is if I was voting Brexit, I would hear other people amplifying Brexit. I wouldn't hear the counter narrative to it, so I wouldn't learn. I wouldn't understand what's going on. What's the other side saying? And in warfare, they do it all the time. Day in, day out. People pay a lot of money to control this narrative, to shape our opinions.
I mean, in the footage space, you can tell you know we're our team is small, but I mean we have eyes out on just about every source for where we could find footage, and you can tell when somebody makes a comment like the only footage I see is Ukrainian or the only footage I see is Russian. You can really tell that the echo chamber has solidified around them because one thing is absolutely certain: whether or not Russia is what we thought they were, they are still to a certain extent a large force. They are still dug in very well, especially in Zaporizhia. And it is an absolute grind, and there is more footage from this war than any other war that I have been alive for, at least, or that I have researched or attempted to find footage for. And there is a lot of it. Believe it or not, there is a lot more of it from Ukraine because I think from early on, Ukraine understood the value from an information warfare space of publishing what was happening on the ground. Russia was actually taking phones from their soldiers early on in the war, but we have started to see more helmet cam footage from Russia. We're starting to see more direct action footage from Russia, which is really just helping us better understand, what we were seeing from a mapping perspective. We still see Ukraine conducting ambushes on them. I mean, we see Russians conducting none of that, all of that aside, we have a lens now into warfare, and the public has a lens that you really only previously got if you were there, and it's an imperfect lens.
You think that what you're saying there is great, exactly. Is that you think about previous wars, even like the invasion when I went into Iraq, Afghanistan early on. This is pre iPhone days. We never had phones with us. We didn't have camera phones even. So we didn't have phones, but we didn't have camera phones. Is that whenever people had information on what was going on, they'd read a newspaper or they'd tune into the 6 o'clock, 10 o'clock, whatever o'clock it was, news to see what was going on. They didn't have the luxury of social media. Now warfare is played out live. Azerbaijan attacking Armenia the other day, Nagorno-Karabakh, is within 1 hour of them attacking, they're uploading drone footage of their attacks. Yeah. We're living it. We can literally sit in our basement and we can watch a war play out live, pretty much. And as journalists, is the biggest source of information is social media because people posting currently, bam, what's going on, and you're picking up and then you dilute the shit. You take the good stuff. So war is played out very much quickly through this world. And you think about Call of Duty, people that play computer games. I met a British volunteer actually that come out here, and I was like to him, have you been to war before? He goes, no, I've never been to war, kind of thing. I go, you understand that this war is against Russia? He goes, yeah, I played a lot of Call of Duty. And I was like, what? And the reality is that a guy, he was like 24, 25, he's played games online that he thinks that that's how real life is. Because when he looks online and he sees like Ukrainian or Azeri or Armenian or Russian drone footage, that's what he's seen on his computer game. Is that war is that boundary between the reality of someone being blown up and the reality of what they see on social media are two different things. And it's crazy that people think, well, they don't think, but they see that war's played out very quickly. It's not a photographer who's got a reel of film that he's got to go get developed in a red room. Instantly, you put it on social media. It's on Twitter. It's on Instagram. It's there. It's that real life moment.
Instant gratification of
Yeah,
war,
it is.
of your desire to see war.
Yeah. And I think, and that's the big issue. That's the thing is, we've become desensitized with war because we see it so much now. And like you were saying a minute ago about the footage from Ukraine is intense. When I was in the military, I went to the commando school for 14 months, I think it was, to take basic recruits through. And when you give a lecture, you just imagine a bayonet. You're giving a lecture on a bayonet. This is the bayonet. Do you know what I mean? This is why I use it. I can imagine my mates who are still instructing in military school showing videos of what's going on in Ukraine to say, this is the reason why you need to learn this. Throwing grenade. The reason why you need to learn to throw a grenade. And now here's a video, bang, of some Ukrainian or Russian in a trench throwing a grenade through a trench. Is that as Americans and Brits now, we're has-beens when it comes to the modern day tactics. We're behind the curve of the Russians and the Ukrainians. These aren't the market leaders as such in warfare to a certain degree because they're current. They're very current. You think about the sleeping giant, the Chinese, who everyone's worried about the Chinese in years to come, and I think China is a massive threat. But their military hasn't been used for years. They haven't been used. They're not current. The Russians and the Ukrainians are the most current military force in the world. And we're learning from them. They've learned from the Karabakh War on how to use drones, for example. Now the world, NATO is learning, and even like China and Russia are learning from what's going on in this war because it is changing. Warfare changes. Is what we've done in Afghanistan isn't what they're doing here now. And you need to adapt. You think of the next war. You don't think of the war.
Yeah, the balance, for us, so the training value to footage, we have partnerships with ranges and training centers. That's something that we really love to lean in on because you're right. There are lessons that you can derive from the war in Ukraine, but even beyond just the war in Ukraine, from like a home defense perspective, you can, the footage on our site, you can derive lessons from that. So on the one hand is being an enabler for the furthering of how we conduct war or how we protect ourselves, our families. On the other hand is the careful balance of how do you help people understand war, right? Without desensitizing it. And there is no perfect way to do that. You know what I mean? It's a constant daily struggle that our team has. Is we have a lot of footage on the site and we ourselves are having to second guess. Is this something that provides, insight into war that people need, or is this something that is just going to shock somebody, right? It's a difficult mission and a difficult balance, but what does help balance it out is having folks like Emile come on and help us cut through the footage and learn a little bit more about wars that, like the war in the Nagorno-Karabakh, that we're really not able to follow with the lack of attention on it. Emile, thanks very much for coming on with us. I appreciate you very much, sir. I'm sure everybody just appreciates your insights that you have. I'll have a link down at the bottom for all of your socials and where folks can find all that stuff. Hopefully the next time we talk, it's over a beer.
Yeah, definitely. And if anyone's got any questions or they want to talk more, you can send me a message on Instagram, Facebook, LinkedIn, or whatever it is. And I'm always happy to. Everything I do is about education. Is that being ex-forces like yourself? Is that you now want to educate people on how to prevent wars, and that, do you know what I mean, it's not the future, but it's a necessity evil sometimes. So yeah, no, appreciate your time and everything, mate. Good speaking.